The ballroom sparkled with golden lights, reflecting off crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen stars above the heads of elegantly dressed guests. Waiters moved through the crowd with practiced ease, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. In the midst of the luxury, a young woman named Clara quietly made her way through the room, carrying plates with a careful balance that belied her nervousness. She'd been working at the hotel for several months, doing whatever shifts she could pick up, always keeping her head down, trying not to draw attention to herself. Tonight was no different, even if the surroundings made her feel like she had walked into another world. Clara's mind wandered as she moved, thinking about her mother's upcoming hospital bills, about the rent that had been due last week, about the way life seemed to pile hardship upon her in ways that never seemed fair. The rich people here, in their tailored suits and sparkling gowns, seemed to float through life on a completely different planet. They laughed and clinked glasses, exchanging polite words that sometimes rang hollow to someone like her, someone who had to stretch every dollar to make ends meet. She kept moving, trying to focus on the tasks at hand, delivering drinks and hors d'oeuvres with a smile that felt like armor. Across the room, Edward Langston, the host of the evening, watched the crowd with a satisfied grin. He was a man who enjoyed the trappings of wealth and power, someone who had built a reputation not just for his business success, but also for his sharp tongue and occasional cruelty masked as humor. He surveyed the party, enjoying the attention he commanded. The live pianist at the corner of the room played softly, providing an elegant background that seemed almost designed to make the guests feel even more luxurious. Edward noticed Clara moving gracefully between tables, balancing trays and managing a polite smile. He chuckled quietly to himself. There was something about her humility and quiet presence that he found amusing. Not in admiration, but in the way some people see a blank canvas, ready to be turned into a spectacle. His eyes twinkled with mischief as he leaned slightly toward a nearby guest. "Watch this," he said, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Clara carried on, delivering a tray of champagne to a group of women discussing a charity auction. She overheard snippets of conversation that made her heart ache and her stomach twist. "It's simply breathtaking," one of the women said, gesturing to a painting that Clara barely had the chance to see. They spoke of art trips to Europe, vacations on private yachts, and dinners at places Clara could only dream of visiting. She took a deep breath and forced a smile as she handed over the tray, muttering a quiet "enjoy" before moving on. The party continued with laughter, clinking glasses and the soft background music of the piano. Clara moved steadily, trying not to be noticed, but she couldn't ignore the subtle glances Edward cast in her direction. She felt a flutter of unease but tried to focus on her work. The trays were heavy, the guests demanding, and the night seemed to stretch endlessly. Every so often she felt her nerves tighten, knowing that any misstep could draw attention, especially in a place filled with people who lived in a world so far removed from hers. Edward finally rose from his chair, brushing off his perfectly tailored suit. He clapped his hands together lightly to draw attention. The music softened and a few guests turned toward him, curious. Clara, carrying a tray of desserts, paused instinctively, unsure of what was happening. Edward smiled broadly, a charming mask hiding the glint of his mischief. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily over the soft music, "we have a special opportunity tonight. But first, I think we need a bit of entertainment from someone very unexpected." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She glanced around, confused, as the eyes of the room began to shift toward her. Whispers rippled through the guests, their curiosity piqued. Edward's gaze met hers, and a polite, almost amused smile crossed his face. He gestured toward the grand piano at the far end of the room. "Why don't we let our lovely waitress here play a piece for us? Surely she has some hidden talents we have yet to discover." Clara froze. Her hands tightened around the tray, and she felt a rush of heat flood her face. The room seemed to shrink, the glittering lights turning into a spotlight that was painfully focused on her. She shook her head quickly, murmuring, I can't. I'm not a pianist." But Edward laughed, a rich, confident sound that carried across the room. "Nonsense. Everyone has a talent. Surely you can play something. Come on, let us see it." The crowd, sensing the drama, leaned in, some with excitement, some with barely concealed amusement. Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes, strangers in their finery, fixated on her. Her stomach churned, but she knew resisting too strongly would only make the situation worse. With trembling hands, Clara set down her tray and walked toward the grand piano. Each step felt heavier than the last. The polished floor reflected her image, and for a moment, she saw herself not as a waitress but as someone small and insignificant in a world that seemed impossibly large and intimidating. She sat down at the piano bench, her fingers hovering above the keys. She hadn't played in years, not since life's responsibilities had forced her to put aside her dreams, but the instrument beneath her fingers felt familiar, almost like an old friend she had been longing to see. The room was silent save for the soft echo of her breath. She closed her eyes briefly, letting memories of late nights spent practicing flood her mind. Her fingers found the keys almost instinctively, starting with a soft, hesitant note. The first few tones were quiet, careful, almost apologetic, as if she were testing whether the world was ready to hear her. Then gradually, the music began to flow, the notes gaining confidence and strength, weaving a melody that was both tender and powerful. Clara's nerves melted into the music, and for the first time that evening, she forgot about the luxury around her, about Edward's teasing, about the eyes watching her every move. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Conversation ceased. Waiters paused mid-step, trays suspended in the air. Edward, who had expected laughter or mild amusement, felt his smirk falter as the melody grew. The music was not just good, it was astonishing. Each note carried emotion, telling a story of struggle, hope, and unspoken dreams. Clara's fingers danced over the keys with a grace that left the audience spellbound. She played not for approval, not for praise, but because it was who she was, what she had always been, even if life had temporarily hidden it from the world. As the first piece ended, a hush fell over the room. Guests looked at one another, some with wide eyes, some with tears glistening in the corners. The piano's final note lingered in the air, heavy and full of meaning. Clara exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted them from the keys. She opened her eyes and found Edward staring at her, a mixture of surprise and admiration flashing across his face. The laughter he had anticipated was gone, replaced by something he had not expected: genuine awe. The silence held for a heartbeat. Then a slow ripple of applause began, growing louder with each passing second. Clara felt a blush rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the unexpected validation. The room had shifted. Where there had been mockery, now there was respect. The pianist who had played before her even stepped forward, shaking his head in disbelief, his own hand still poised over the keys. Guests whispered to one another, sharing glances of amazement. And for a moment Clara felt like she belonged, like she was no longer invisible in a world that had seemed so out of reach. Edward finally recovered, approaching her with a hesitant smile. He extended a hand, not in mockery this time, but with genuine acknowledgement. "I must admit," he said quietly so only she could hear, "I didn't expect that." Clara gave a small, polite nod, unsure of what to say. The weight of the evening, the nerves, the fear of embarrassment, had all melted away in the simple act of playing the piano. For a brief moment she felt something she had not felt in a long time, pure, unguarded joy. As the music settled into memory, Clara returned to her duties, but the atmosphere of the room had changed. Guests approached her asking questions, complimenting her, and for once, she answered with a smile that felt genuine. The rest of the night continued, but something intangible had shifted. Clara had reminded everyone present, and perhaps herself most of all, that talent could not be hidden forever. And even in a world of glittering wealth and subtle cruelty, true skill and heart always shone through. After her unexpected performance, Clara returned to her duties, still feeling the warmth of the applause lingering on her skin. She carried the trays with slightly more confidence now, though the nerves from earlier still buzzed faintly in her chest. The guests who had only moments ago been indifferent to her presence now watched her with curious eyes. Some whispered among themselves, pointing discreetly, while others offered genuine smiles. It was as if she had stepped briefly into another world, where her life's struggles mattered less than her talent. Edward, who had been at the center of the initial spectacle, now observed her from across the room. His usual arrogance had softened, replaced with an unfamiliar mix of surprise and cautious respect. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink quietly, analyzing the change in atmosphere. For the first time that evening, he felt a slight loss of control over the situation he had orchestrated for amusement. Clara's presence had shifted the energy of the room, and he could feel it. Clara's hands were steady as she approached a table of important guests, offering desserts with a polite smile. One of the women, who had earlier been discussing expensive vacations, leaned forward and said softly, "That was beautiful. You play as if you were born for it." Clara's lips curved into a small, grateful smile, her voice catching slightly as she replied, "Thank you. I enjoy it." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years spent hiding her abilities from a world that hadn't seemed ready to notice them. Despite her attempts to focus on her tasks, Clara's mind kept drifting back to the piano. She remembered the way the keys had felt under her fingers, how the music had flowed almost effortlessly after so many years of practice. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to play without worry, without deadlines or the constant pressure of survival. That brief moment of freedom, of being fully herself, had been intoxicating. Yet she also remembered the glance from Edward, the faintly mocking sparkle in his eyes before the performance, and it made her feel exposed in a way that was almost painful. As the evening continued, Edward stood up once more, this time calling out in a more controlled tone, trying to regain some measure of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a remarkable display of talent. Truly unexpected. I think we can all agree that our evening has become much more interesting." His words carried a subtle edge, but the sincerity in the room's applause was undeniable. Guests nodded, some exchanging impressed glances, while others turned their attention back to their conversations, now enriched by a story they would recount later. Clara tried to stay in the background, returning to her tasks with quiet efficiency, but it became increasingly difficult. Guests approached her with questions and compliments, and she answered each politely, though her shyness made her cheeks flush. Some asked where she had trained. Others inquired if she had ever performed professionally. Clara gave careful, humble answers, often smiling and downplaying her abilities. "I used to play when I was younger," she said gently. "Life got busy, but I still enjoy it." The responses varied from polite nods to wide-eyed admiration, each reaction reinforcing the reality that her talent was real and impactful. Edward watched these interactions with a mixture of curiosity and unease. His plan had been to embarrass a young waitress for his amusement, yet what had unfolded was the exact opposite. The room had shifted. The guests were not laughing at her but celebrating her. Clara had inadvertently exposed a world he had never quite understood, a world where true skill, passion, and authenticity held weight over wealth and social standing. It made him pause, reflecting on his own behavior and the assumptions he had carried about those he considered beneath him. Meanwhile, Clara noticed a few other staff members watching her with interest. They had seen the way she handled herself and the way she played, and some exchanged quiet whispers of encouragement. A fellow waiter who had always been supportive but quiet said softly, "I didn't know you could play like that. It's incredible." Clara's smile in response was warm but modest, a reflection of her natural humility. She didn't seek recognition. She had simply allowed herself a fleeting moment of expression, and now it was reverberating through the room in unexpected ways. The piano itself seemed to call to her once more. As the previous melody lingered in the air, Clara felt a familiar pull, a subtle urge to return and continue where she had left off. She glanced at Edward, who had been watching her closely, and met his gaze. There was a quiet tension in the air, an unspoken challenge lingering between them. For a moment, she considered refusing, stepping away completely and letting the night continue without further incident. But the music within her would not be silenced so easily. Summoning courage, Clara made her way back to the grand piano, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd, sensing another moment of anticipation, quieted once more. Edward leaned slightly forward, curious to see whether she would perform again. Clara took her seat at the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a brief moment, centering herself. The memory of her first performance, the unexpected applause, and the validation it had brought filled her with both nervousness and determination. She would play, not to prove anything to Edward or the guests, but to reclaim a part of herself that had been hidden for far too long. The first notes she played were soft, tentative, almost apologetic, as if testing the room's patience. But as her confidence grew, the melody became richer, more intricate, and filled with emotion. Each note told a story, a tapestry of struggle, hope, and longing. Guests were captivated once again, their earlier conversations fading into the background. Some leaned forward entranced, while others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Clara felt herself dissolving into the rhythm, the piano becoming an extension of her own voice. Edward's expression had changed dramatically. He no longer wore the smirk of someone amused by a joke. Instead, he looked genuinely surprised, even humbled. He had expected entertainment at Clara's expense, but what he witnessed was far more profound. A raw, unfiltered display of talent and emotion that no wealth or social standing could replicate. For the first time that evening, he felt the weight of his own assumptions, and a small, unspoken admiration began to take root. As the piece came to a close, the room erupted once more with applause, this time louder and more enthusiastic than before. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she lifted them from the keys, but her heart swelled with a quiet pride. She had not performed for recognition or approval. She had played because it was a part of who she was, and in doing so she had reminded everyone present, and perhaps herself most of all, of the power of authenticity and passion. Clara returned to her duties, her steps lighter, her smile more genuine. The guests who had once barely noticed her now sought her out, engaging in polite conversation, asking questions about her music, and offering words of admiration. She responded with grace and humility, her natural warmth drawing people in. Edward, meanwhile, remained at the edge of the room, observing the transformation he had inadvertently set in motion. The night continued, filled with laughter, conversation, and the lingering memory of a young woman who had dared to reveal her true self in a room full of strangers. And for Clara, the evening marked a turning point, a subtle but profound shift that would echo in her life for years to come. Clara tried to focus on her work after the second performance, but the energy in the room was different now, and she felt it pressing on her in a way that was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Guests who had barely noticed her presence earlier now made a point of looking for her, smiling as she passed by or whispering to each other about her performance. Each time she carried a tray, she could feel their eyes on her, and though it made her stomach twist with nerves, it also gave her a strange sense of pride. Edward observed from his usual spot, a glass of wine in hand, his sharp gaze following her movements. The amusement that had sparked his plan to embarrass her was now replaced by something unfamiliar. Genuine curiosity. He couldn't help but watch how people reacted to Clara, how her quiet confidence seemed to ripple through the room like a subtle force. Every small smile, every whisper of admiration seemed to prick at him, challenging the assumptions he had held about people like her. Clara moved carefully among the guests, offering drinks and desserts with polite efficiency. Each time she answered a question about her music, she noticed the surprise on their faces at her modesty. When asked if she had performed in public before, she shook her head softly, explaining that life had gotten in the way and that playing for herself had always been enough. Guests nodded thoughtfully, some leaning closer to get more of her story. The attention was overwhelming but not unwelcome. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a world where her talent was recognized not as a fleeting surprise, but as something valued. As the night progressed, Edward decided to intervene again, attempting to steer the focus back toward him. He clapped lightly, drawing the attention of the room, and smiled with his usual charm. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a remarkable display of talent," he said, though his tone carried a hint of disbelief. "Perhaps we should give her a proper spotlight." The suggestion sent a ripple of excitement through the guests. Some exchanged curious glances, wondering what he meant. Clara felt her chest tighten, unsure if she wanted to be at the center of attention once more. Yet she felt an undeniable pull toward the piano. The pianist who had been performing earlier stepped aside, offering Clara an encouraging nod. Clara took a deep breath and walked back to the grand piano, her fingers brushing over the polished keys with a familiar warmth. She seated herself, letting the music guide her. The first notes were cautious, testing the room's patience, but soon the melody blossomed, weaving a story of resilience and hope. She let her emotions flow through the music, each note carrying fragments of her past struggles, her dreams, and the quiet strength that had kept her going through the hardest times. Guests watched in awe as the music filled the room, the piano's voice commanding attention without effort. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others leaned forward, captivated by the depth and complexity of her playing. Clara lost herself in the music, the world outside the piano keys fading into background noise. For a moment she felt weightless, free from the worries that usually dominated her mind. Edward's eyes were fixed on her, and he could no longer see the young waitress he had intended to embarrass. Instead, he saw a musician, a storyteller, someone whose presence demanded respect. His earlier amusement was gone, replaced by a mix of admiration and unease. He had witnessed something genuine, something powerful, and it unsettled him more than he expected. The power of her talent was undeniable, and he realized that no amount of wealth or influence could replicate what she had shared with the room. As the piece continued, Clara's confidence grew. She began to experiment with the melody, adding subtle flourishes and variations that drew even more attention. Guests leaned closer, drawn in by the unexpected complexity and emotional resonance. Whispers of amazement spread through the room, and for the first time that evening, Clara felt seen not as a waitress, but as an artist. The music she had kept hidden for so long now belonged to her fully, and the response from the audience validated years of quiet dedication. The pianist, who had been performing earlier, returned to his place at the side of the room, watching with quiet admiration. He had played at many prestigious events, yet he had rarely seen someone capture the attention of a room so completely with such natural talent. He leaned slightly toward a colleague and murmured, "She has something special." "You can feel it in every note," the colleague nodded. Equally impressed, both recognizing the rare combination of skill, emotion, and presence that Clara possessed, Edward, still watching, felt a strange mix of emotions. He had intended to highlight her for his amusement, but instead he had become an observer of her brilliance. He realized that his attempts to assert control over the situation had been irrelevant. Clara's talent had transcended his expectations and his carefully constructed plans. He felt a faint sting of humility, a rare sensation for someone accustomed to being in command. In that moment, he acknowledged silently the power of authenticity and genuine skill. As the final notes of her performance echoed through the room, a hush fell over the audience. For a heartbeat, no one moved or spoke. Then slowly the applause began, swelling into a thunderous ovation. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she lifted them from the keys, her heart racing with a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had faced the spotlight not once but twice, and had emerged with her dignity intact, her talent recognized and celebrated. Returning to her duties, Clara felt a new sense of calm confidence. The nervousness that had gripped her earlier was replaced by a quiet assurance that she could face challenges and still emerge stronger. Guests approached her, asking about her music, offering compliments and sharing their own stories of artistic pursuits. She listened and responded with warmth and humility, feeling a connection with people she had once assumed were unreachable. Edward observed these interactions, a faint smile playing on his lips. He approached her cautiously, uncertain of how to acknowledge the impact she had made without overstepping. "You have a gift," he said quietly so only she could hear. "Truly remarkable." Clara nodded politely, a simple acknowledgement that carried more meaning than words could convey. She did not need praise from Edward to feel validated. The response of the guests, the music itself, and her own sense of accomplishment were enough. As the evening drew to a close, the room buzzed with conversations and reflections on the unexpected performances. Clara moved among the guests, delivering final drinks and desserts, feeling a sense of pride and satisfaction that had been absent from her life for years. She had stepped into the spotlight, faced her fears, and shared a part of herself that few had ever seen. The experience had changed the room, changed Edward, and most importantly, changed her own perception of what she was capable of achieving. When the last guest departed, Clara returned to the kitchen where the staff congratulated her quietly. She smiled, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The events of the evening had revealed something profound, that talent and authenticity could not be hidden forever, and that even in a world filled with wealth, power, and social hierarchy, genuine skill and passion could command respect and admiration. For Clara, the night had been more than just an opportunity to play. It had been a moment of affirmation, a reminder that she was capable of remarkable things when she allowed herself to shine fully and unapologetically. The room had settled into a comfortable hum after Clara's second performance, but the energy in the air remained charged with a kind of quiet excitement. Guests whispered to one another, still replaying the melody in their minds. Some had already taken out their phones, capturing a few notes, eager to share the moment with friends or revisit it later. Clara moved carefully, carrying trays of food and drinks, but now there was a subtle difference in the way she navigated the room. She was still polite, still humble, but there was a faint light in her eyes, a small spark that hadn't been there before. Edward watched from his usual place, observing how the room had shifted around Clara. The smug amusement that had motivated him earlier had dissolved into a complicated mix of astonishment and respect. He had planned to highlight her for entertainment, to see her squirm under the attention of wealthy guests, but instead, she had drawn everyone in with something entirely different. Her talent, her presence, and the authenticity she radiated. He could see the subtle reactions, whispered compliments, wide-eyed admiration, and even quiet awe from those who were used to being unimpressed. Clara approached a table of older guests, delivering a tray of desserts. One woman leaned forward, speaking softly. "Your music. It's incredible. I could listen to it all night." Clara's smile was shy but genuine. "Thank you. I've always loved playing. Life sometimes pulls you away, but the piano has always been a part of me." The woman nodded thoughtfully, as if understanding more than Clara had said. That small connection, formed through her music, warmed her heart and reminded her why she had spent so many hours alone practicing, long before anyone could applaud her. As the evening continued, Edward made a subtle decision. He could feel the crowd's admiration for Clara, and realized that no sarcastic comment or planned spectacle could reverse it. He rose once again, raising a glass to quiet attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady but carrying a hint of humility, "I believe we have witnessed something extraordinary tonight. Clara has reminded us of the power of passion and the beauty of talent that often goes unseen." His words were genuine, and many guests responded with applause, some even leaning forward to express their gratitude for the unexpected performance. Clara, seated at a nearby table for a brief rest, felt her cheeks warm, not from embarrassment this time, but from a quiet pride. Despite the recognition, Clara knew that this evening was not about applause or attention. Her heart still carried the memories of the quiet hours spent practicing in her small room, the music being her constant companion during difficult times. She remembered the nights when she would play in solitude, her fingers tracing familiar melodies, the piano filling the room with sounds that no one but she heard. Those memories were the foundation of her skill, the source of the authenticity that now captivated everyone in the grand ballroom. The pianist who had been playing before Clara returned to the piano for a brief moment, observing her from the side. He had played in many prestigious venues, but he had rarely encountered someone who commanded attention so naturally, whose music carried such emotional weight. He leaned toward a colleague, whispering, "She has something rare. Listen to the way she tells a story with every note." The colleague nodded, equally impressed, both of them recognizing the depth and authenticity that Clara brought to the performance. It wasn't just technical skill, it was heart, experience, and honesty, woven into every key pressed. Clara's attention returned to her immediate surroundings. Guests continued to approach, eager to speak with her, to ask about her music and her story. Each interaction was brief but meaningful. A young man asked if she had considered performing professionally, to which Clara shook her head softly. "I've always played for myself. I never imagined anyone would be interested in hearing more than a few pieces." The man smiled, understanding the humility and quiet strength in her answer. Edward remained nearby, observing these interactions closely. He had started the evening with a certain arrogance, believing he could control the narrative and amuse himself at Clara's expense. Yet now he could see that authenticity could not be manufactured or manipulated. Clara's music had transcended the boundaries he assumed were so rigid. He realized that his wealth and status could not command the respect her talent naturally inspired. There was a subtle lesson in humility unfolding before him, one that he hadn't expected to encounter in the middle of a gala. Meanwhile, Clara felt the familiar pull of the piano once again. She glanced across the room and saw Edward watching, his expression a mix of curiosity and reluctant admiration. She debated briefly whether to return to the instrument, fearing further attention but also feeling an irresistible urge to play. Music had always been her refuge, and in that moment it called to her insistently. She moved toward the grand piano once more, each step measured, aware that all eyes were on her. Seating herself, Clara let her fingers hover over the keys. She paused, closing her eyes for a brief moment, centering herself. The memory of the earlier melodies flowed through her, bringing a sense of calm and focus. She began to play softly, allowing the notes to spill naturally, her touch gentle yet confident. The music gradually built in complexity and emotion, carrying the story of her life, her struggles, and the quiet strength she had cultivated over the years. Guests leaned forward, captivated by the depth and nuance of her playing. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others exchanged whispered compliments and amazed glances. Clara was unaware of the impact each note was having. She was fully absorbed, the music flowing through her as naturally as breathing. Every key pressed was a reflection of her journey, a story told without words, reaching directly into the hearts of those listening. Edward's attention remained fixed on her. He had expected a moment of amusement, a brief diversion for his own entertainment, but he found himself humbled by the display of genuine talent and emotional expression. The way Clara commanded the room with her music, drawing admiration not through spectacle but through authenticity, was something he had never anticipated. He shifted slightly in his chair, reflecting quietly on the lesson that life had presented him without warning, that true skill and passion could not be bought, faked or manipulated. The pianist who had stepped aside earlier watched silently, recognizing the rare brilliance in Clara's performance. He had performed for audiences accustomed to technical perfection and dramatic flair. Yet Clara's music held something deeper: heart, authenticity, and a story conveyed purely through the instrument. He nodded subtly to himself, acknowledging that what he had witnessed was extraordinary. As the piece concluded, the room remained quiet for a heartbeat, suspended in the lingering resonance of the final notes. Then slowly, applause began to rise, soft at first and then growing louder until the room erupted in genuine admiration. Guests rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically, some with tears in their eyes. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she lifted them from the keys, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride, relief, and quiet exhilaration. She had performed not for recognition, but because it was a part of her being, and in doing so, she had touched everyone present. Returning to her duties, Clara felt a subtle transformation within herself. The nerves and uncertainty that had plagued her earlier were replaced with a quiet confidence, a reminder that her abilities were real and meaningful. Guests continued to approach, eager to share their impressions and ask about her music, and she responded with warmth, humility, and honesty. Each conversation reinforced a truth she had always known: that talent, when paired with authenticity, commanded respect beyond social boundaries and personal assumptions. Edward approached her cautiously, unsure of how to acknowledge her impact without seeming insincere. "You have a remarkable gift," he said quietly so only she could hear. Clara nodded, offering a simple, polite smile. The acknowledgement mattered, but not as much as the validation she had already received from the audience and, more importantly, from herself. As the evening drew to a close, the atmosphere in the ballroom remained vibrant, filled with conversations and reflections on the unexpected performances. Clara moved among the guests, delivering final refreshments and exchanging polite farewells. The night had revealed more than just her talent. It had unveiled a part of her spirit that was resilient, authentic, and unshakable. The music had bridged the gap between worlds, connecting her to people she had once considered distant and unattainable, and leaving a lasting impression that would be remembered by everyone present. In the quiet moments after the last guests departed, Clara returned to the kitchen, greeted by the staff who offered quiet congratulations. She smiled, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. The evening had been transformative, not because of the applause or recognition, but because she had allowed herself to shine fully, to express a part of herself that had been hidden for far too long. The experience had reaffirmed the value of authenticity, the power of talent, and the impact of sharing one's true self no matter the circumstances. Clara knew deep in her heart that this night was not just a performance, it was a turning point, a moment that would shape her future and remain etched in her memory forever. The morning after the gala, Clara woke with a sense of lingering wonder. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a vivid dream. Each note she had played and every reaction from the guests etched deeply into her memory. Though she had returned to the routine of her work, the applause and admiration she had received continued to echo in her mind. giving her a sense of validation that she had long believed would never come. She dressed quietly, her thoughts still tangled in the extraordinary shift that had taken place overnight. At the hotel, the atmosphere was lighter than usual. Staff exchanged knowing glances and quiet smiles when they saw Clara arrive. Her colleagues, who had always respected her for her diligence, now seemed to view her with a new kind of admiration. They spoke softly about the evening's performances, about how the room had fallen silent when she played, and how even the most skeptical guests had been visibly moved. Clara listened politely, her modesty intact, yet inside she felt a swell of pride. She knew that the music she had shared was an extension of herself, something that went beyond recognition and applause. It was a bridge between her inner world and the world outside. Meanwhile, Edward Langston reviewed the video clips he had secretly taken during the gala. His intention had been to capture the amusement of the moment, but what he found instead were recordings of Clara's performances, two pieces that were breathtaking in their technical precision and emotional depth. He watched, noting the delicate way her fingers traced the keys, the emotion that radiated through each chord. Edward leaned back in his chair, realizing that his plan to create a humorous story at her expense had been utterly overturned. The talent he had sought to mock was far more impressive than he had anticipated, and it left him feeling a mix of humility and newfound respect. Word of Clara's performance began to spread beyond the hotel walls. Some guests who had attended the gala shared their experiences with friends, colleagues, and on social media, highlighting the unexpected brilliance of the young waitress who had captivated the entire room. Messages arrived at the hotel, some requesting information about her background, others simply expressing admiration and amazement. Clara handled the inquiries with her usual grace, responding with gentle humility. She emphasized that she had played for the joy of music, never imagining it would draw such attention. The staff at the hotel noticed the shift in the atmosphere. Guests who had previously ignored the servers now acknowledged Clara, offering polite words, smiles, and gestures of appreciation. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. She had moved from being invisible to being recognized not just for her diligence, but for her unique talent and presence. Clara carried on with her duties, still attentive and professional, but there was a quiet confidence in her demeanor. She no longer felt the weight of invisibility that had been a constant companion in her work life. Edward approached Clara during a break, choosing his words carefully. He had learned that the power of genuine talent and humility could not be dismissed, and he wanted to acknowledge the impact she had made without diminishing the authenticity of her achievements. "You have an extraordinary gift," he said softly, his voice sincere. "Last night you reminded everyone here, including me, of the power of true artistry." "It was remarkable." Clara nodded politely, her modesty intact, though a faint smile touched her lips. She did not need Edward's validation. The experience itself and the reactions of the audience were reward enough. Yet his acknowledgement carried weight, a subtle recognition from someone who had intended to see her embarrassed. In the days that followed, Clara's life began to shift subtly. Calls and messages came from music enthusiasts, producers, and even small concert venues interested in hearing more of her performances. She was initially hesitant, unsure if she could step into the spotlight that her music now demanded. The thought of performing professionally had once seemed like a distant dream, one that had been set aside due to life's pressing responsibilities. Yet the recognition she received ignited a sense of possibility that she had not felt in years. One afternoon, a music producer who had attended the gala reached out to Clara. He spoke with a calm enthusiasm, expressing his admiration for her skill and the depth of emotion in her performances. "I've attended many concerts," he said, "but rarely have I encountered someone who can capture an audience so completely, with such sincerity and talent. I would like to help you share your music with a larger audience." Clara listened carefully, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had never considered stepping into a professional realm, but the opportunity presented itself not as a demand, but as an invitation to explore her potential. Clara spent the next few days reflecting on her path. She realized that her life's hardships had not diminished her talent. They had, in many ways, strengthened it, infusing her music with a depth and authenticity that could not be taught. She considered the possibilities of performing professionally, of allowing her music to reach a wider audience, and of embracing a role that had once seemed impossible. Her heart was cautious, but it beat with a quiet anticipation for the journey ahead. Meanwhile, Edward continued to observe from afar, intrigued by the way Clara's story unfolded. He had witnessed firsthand how quickly admiration and recognition could replace the assumptions he had held about someone's social standing or occupation. He noted the growing attention she received and the subtle transformation in the hotel's atmosphere. Even his own perspective had shifted. He found himself reflecting on his behavior and the unintended lessons he had learned about humility, respect, and the unpredictable nature of talent. Clara decided to meet with the music producer to discuss potential opportunities. The conversation was both practical and inspiring, exploring possibilities for recitals, recordings, and small-scale concerts. Clara's humility remained, but her confidence had grown. She spoke thoughtfully about her experiences, her love of music, and the journey that had brought her to this point. The producer listened intently, recognizing not only her technical skill but also the emotional depth and authenticity that distinguished her from many other performers. Returning home that evening, Clara reflected on how drastically her life had begun to change. The recognition she received at the gala, the subsequent attention, and the opportunities that were emerging all signaled a turning point. Yet she remained grounded, aware that her talent was not a fleeting moment but a lifelong pursuit. The piano had always been her refuge, her companion through difficult times, and now it was becoming a bridge to a future she had once only imagined. In the following weeks, Clara's reputation continued to grow. Social media posts, shared clips of her performances, and word-of-mouth recommendations drew increasing attention. Invitations arrived for local recitals and small venues eager to feature her music. Each new opportunity was approached with careful thought and humility. Clara remained conscious of the responsibility that came with recognition, understanding that her talent carried both personal fulfillment and the potential to inspire others. Edward, observing the unfolding events, reflected on the lessons of the evening. He had entered the gala with a desire to amuse himself at Clara's expense, yet the experience had challenged his assumptions, revealing the power of authenticity and the unexpected consequences of underestimating someone. He had learned that true talent and passion command attention and respect regardless of social standing or preconceived notions. The encounter left him with a lasting sense of humility and a new appreciation for the unseen strengths in others. For Clara, the journey was only beginning. She balanced her work at the hotel with emerging opportunities in music, carefully navigating each decision with thoughtfulness and humility. The experience of performing for the gala had revealed not just her abilities but also her capacity to embrace new possibilities, to step into spaces that once seemed unreachable, and to share her gift with a wider audience. Each note she played carried both her history and her hope for the future, a testament to the power of perseverance, passion, and authenticity. As the days turned into weeks, Clara began performing in small venues, gaining confidence and building a reputation for captivating audiences with her skill and emotion. She remained humble, grateful for every opportunity and mindful of the journey that had brought her to this point. Her music became more than a personal passion. It became a connection with others, a bridge that allowed her to inspire and touch lives beyond her own. The gala remained a defining moment in Clara's life, the night when hidden talent met an unsuspecting audience and transformed the perception of those around her. It marked the start of a path that combined resilience, humility, and undeniable skill, shaping a future that once seemed distant and unattainable. Clara had stepped into the light, not for fame or recognition, but to share the essence of who she was. And in doing so, she had changed not only her life but also the lives of those who witnessed the quiet brilliance of her music. Weeks had passed since the gala, and Clara's life had begun to shift in ways she had never imagined. The video of her performance had gone viral online, shared across social media platforms and music forums. Comments poured in, praising her skill, her emotion, and the raw authenticity of her playing. Some viewers remarked that they felt moved to tears, while others marveled at the fact that someone who had once been a quiet waitress could captivate an entire room, and now countless viewers online. Clara read the messages quietly, feeling a mixture of humility and disbelief. She had played for herself, for the joy of music, yet now her talent was reaching people far beyond her imagination. Opportunities began to appear almost daily. Local music venues invited her to perform, while small concert halls expressed interest in hosting recitals. Even music schools reached out, offering mentorship programs and sponsorships to help her refine her talent. Clara approached each opportunity with care, mindful of her responsibilities and determined to maintain her authenticity. She wanted to share her music without losing the essence of why she had played in the first place: the joy, the emotion, the connection that came from her heart. At the hotel, staff members continued to treat her with admiration and respect. Guests who visited in the weeks after the gala sought her out, sometimes just to hear her play a few notes. Clara balanced her waitressing duties with her growing reputation as a pianist, her life feeling fuller yet more complex than ever before. Each day brought new challenges, but also a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer invisible. Her music had given her a voice that could reach others, and she embraced it with gratitude. Edward Langston observed the unfolding events with a mixture of curiosity and humility. The incident at the gala had left a lasting impression on him. He reflected on how his initial intentions to embarrass Clara had backfired completely. Instead, he had witnessed the power of talent, authenticity, and passion. His respect for her grew daily, as did his awareness of how often people are underestimated based on appearances or social standing. The lesson he learned was one he would not forget. True skill and heart could not be diminished by wealth, power, or ego. Clara continued to perform in small venues, gaining confidence with each audience. Each recital taught her something new about herself and her music. She learned to balance technical precision with emotional storytelling, discovering that her life experiences, the hardships, the quiet moments of reflection, the struggle for survival, were the very elements that gave her music depth and resonance. Audiences responded not just to her skill, but to the sincerity that radiated through every note. She realized that the struggles she had faced had not diminished her talent, they had enhanced it, providing layers of emotion that no formal training alone could replicate. In the midst of this growth, Clara received an invitation to perform at a prestigious music festival in the city. The festival organizers had seen her viral performances and were eager to showcase her talent to a larger audience. Clara hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready for such a stage. Yet after careful consideration, she accepted. The opportunity was daunting, but she felt a quiet determination. This was a chance to share her music with more people and to continue the journey that had begun so unexpectedly at the gala. Preparation for the festival was intense. Clara practiced daily, refining her technique and exploring new pieces that would challenge and inspire her. She found herself reflecting on her journey, the long hours of practice in solitude, the times she had doubted herself, and the moments of quiet joy that music had always provided. Each note she played in rehearsal was infused with a sense of purpose and resilience. She was no longer playing merely for herself. She was playing to connect, to inspire, and to convey the emotions that words could not capture. On the day of the festival, Clara arrived early, feeling the familiar mixture of nerves and excitement. The festival hall was grand, filled with an audience eager to experience performances from talented musicians from various backgrounds. She carried her sheet music and adjusted the bench at the piano, taking a moment to breathe deeply. This was a culmination of everything she had worked for, yet she reminded herself to remain grounded. The music was not about fame or applause. It was about sharing her voice, her story, through every note. When Clara began to play, the audience was immediately captivated. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, each chord resonating with emotion. The music flowed effortlessly, telling stories of hardship, hope, and perseverance. The hall was silent, every listener drawn into the world she created with her instrument. Clara lost herself in the performance, feeling a connection to the audience that was almost tangible. Each note carried a piece of her soul, bridging the gap between her personal journey and the hearts of those listening. The applause at the end of her performance was thunderous. Clara's cheeks flushed as she rose from the bench, overwhelmed by the response. People came forward, expressing admiration and gratitude for the depth of feeling her music conveyed. Clara felt a mixture of pride and humility, aware that this moment was the result of years of dedication and the unexpected turning point at the gala that had launched her into this new world. She realized that the courage to share her talent, even when uncertain or vulnerable, had opened doors she never imagined. In the weeks following the festival, Clara continued to receive invitations to perform, each opportunity allowing her to refine her skills and expand her reach. Music became the center of her life, but she remained grounded, remembering the long hours of struggle and the quiet dedication that had brought her to this point. Her experiences had taught her that talent alone was not enough. It required courage, persistence, and the willingness to step into the light even when the outcome was uncertain. Edward reached out to Clara one day, sending a polite message expressing his continued admiration and encouragement. He acknowledged the journey she had undertaken since the gala and recognized the impact she had made on the music community and beyond. Clara responded with warmth and gratitude, appreciative not just of his words, but of the reflection he had undertaken about respect, humility, and the unexpected ways people can inspire change in others. Clara's story continued to inspire others as well. People from various walks of life reached out, sharing how her music had touched them, how her journey reminded them of the importance of perseverance, and how authenticity could create meaningful connections. Clara found herself mentoring young musicians, encouraging them to embrace their unique voices and to pursue their passions, even when faced with obstacles. Her experience at the gala had not only transformed her own life, but it had become a beacon for others seeking to follow their dreams. Years later, Clara would reflect on the night of the gala as a defining moment. It was a night when hidden talent met unexpected opportunity, when courage overcame fear, and when authenticity triumphed over assumptions and social hierarchy. The experience had set her on a path of growth, connection, and purpose, shaping a life that balanced artistry, humility, and the joy of sharing her gift. Clara had transformed from a young waitress quietly carrying trays through a crowded ballroom into a musician whose talent and heart could inspire countless others. The journey was ongoing, but that night had been the spark that illuminated her path, a reminder that true brilliance shines brightest when nurtured with courage, passion, and authenticity.